Welcome everybody.
Where is the camera?
The camera is over there.
Oh, there. Okay.
Hello.
I should just here. Good morning, everybody. We're starting the session with Arturo Moscoso, who will be our only presenter today, and he will introduce himself. He is a freshly graduated conductor who will talk about late 16th century music and some aspects of madrigal music which could have led to the development of opera. So,
thank you very much. I would like, first of all, to thank Professor Joan Grimalt, who unfortunately cannot be here. He has to attend some other conferences, sessions in other rooms. But I'm very glad to be here. It's a great opportunity. It's not my field, but I will try to defend it as good as I can. So I will start talking a bit about the birth of the madrigal and the opera. The birth of the madrigal and... Oh,
sorry.
Thank you. The birth of the madrigal and later opera, the two musical genres that marked the transition from the 16th to the 17th century, brought about important stylistic and conceptual innovations with respect to the ubiquitous sacred music. The madrigal, on one hand, functioned as a field of compositional experimentation through which polyphonists proposed unsuspected melodic turns, unheard harmonies, and above all, a rhetorical musical discourse concerning a literary text. Opera, on the other hand, represented a radically new approach to composition at the beginning of the 17th century, rejecting polyphony completely and opting for an approach to the text through an unaccompanied monodic line. The birth of opera and the rupture it represented with respect to the language used until then can be explained in different ways. The relationship between music and text, already much studied in the madrigals of the late 16th century, is reinforced by the compositional approaches characteristic to opera. Perhaps the main justification that the first opera composers found in the new genre was precisely the capacity it gave them to explain the text correctly, also in its affective dimension, through musical means. From the compositional point of view, polyphony reached an extreme degree of complexity at the end of the 16th century, largely due to the innovations proposed by the madrigal composers, which eventually created the need for a new compositional paradigm, opera and monody in this case, on which it would be possible to build an aesthetic world adapted to the new times. Let's start from the beginning. After the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church sought to entrench the values of Catholicism and its traditions in the territories under its control. Art was, of course, one of the many means by which the Vatican attempted to consolidate its political and spiritual influence. The Council opted for an art that was overwhelming, inaccessible, charged with mystery and passion, and above all, inhuman and divine. Concerning music, the Council chose Palestrina as its highest representative and entrusted him with the task of establishing what would become the polyphonic language par excellence of the entire repertoire of the last third of the 16th century. This character here is Palestrina. Although Palestrina occasionally ventured to compose madrigals and secular music, the vast majority of his output consists of masses and modes. Something similar happens with Tomás Luis de Victoria, Palestrina's pupil, and the main composer of the Spanish crown, who never wrote a single note of secular music. Orlando Di Lasso and William Byrd also stand out for their contributions to counter-reformationist sacred music. The sacred genre that these four composers, among many others, created together is characterized above all by mystery. It is an impermeable, inaudible, divine, and passionate music, which generally avoids the appearance of rhetorical elements and thus makes no concessions to the world of the earthly. It contrasts sharply with the approach to composition characteristic of the Reformist world, which advocates the participation of the people. Let's speak now about the madrigal. Madrigal is understood as any polyphonic song in the vernacular language with a secular text. It is a genre that originated in Italy, especially in 1533, with the publications of Philippe Verdelot. However, the madrigal experienced its greatest development at the end of the 16th century, with composers such as Lasso, Monteverdi, Gesualdo, and Marenzio. This here is Claudio Monteverdi, one of the most prominent madrigal composers. The madrigal is characterized not only by a more florid texture than the motet, but also by its use of rhetorical devices concerning the literary text the music accompanies. These devices often rely on the literal and isolated meaning of certain words in the corresponding poem. When the text speaks of heaven, for example, the music will tend to present ascending terms. On the other hand, when the poem refers to birdsong, for example, the composer will probably write a flowery melisma in one of the upper voices. Although similar circumstances occur in certain motets, the madrigalist's almost obsessive quest to connect music and text, radically separates the two genres. As the 16th century drew to a close, madrigals progressively presented more groundbreaking musical characteristics, always supported by the expression of the corresponding literary text. The madrigals framed within the so-called seconda pratica set out melodic and harmonic contrasts that would not be used again until the end of the 19th century. In their quest to connect music and text, madrigalists performed the voice leading and other structural elements of their compositions. Now I would like to show you some examples of what we just spoke about. This is a madrigal by Monteverdi, Lasciatemi morire, Let Me Die. And I would like to note the fact that the dissonance is in the lower voice, and then the resolution is in the upper voice. This is very, very weird. In fact, it violates directly the counterpoint and voice leading rules. It sounds like this. The fact that later the seventh of the chord is reached by a descending leap of fourth is also not This is a very interesting example. This is the fourth madrigal of the sixth books of madrigals, more known as the Sestina. And I would like to show you the harmonic progressions it makes use in order to get a better understanding of how these madrigals that belong to the seconda pratica sound, what kind of chord progressions they use and are characterized by. This sounds like this. So as you can say, under the word lamendi, lament, it is talking about the lament and the grief of Claudius, the protagonist of the story, who lost his beloved. Monteverdi introduces this very, very special chord, and then perhaps even more special resolution. This same harmonic progression is in the phrase that comes next to this one, this kind of enriched because all the voices participate. I will play it even if it's not there. So as you can see, they make an extremely free use of harmony and of dissonance. Very unlikely to see this in a motet of any kind. However, we will see some examples later. Now, I would like to talk very briefly about Carlo Gesualdo. Very briefly, because I think he's of course very well known by the many innovations that he introduced in the polyphonic style. I would like to briefly show in the beginning of this madrigal. By the way, these chord progressions, as I said before, will not be heard again until Bruckner. Not even Brahms. Not that I know of, sorry. Now let's talk a bit about one very special composer, Orlando Di Lasso. By the way, how
we have 10 minutes.
That's very good. The relevance of Orlando Di Lasso for understanding the coexistence of genres and styles at the end of the 16th century is considerable. The composer, of Belgian origin, worked in various Italian cities, in Antwerp, and finally in Munich at the court of Albert of Bavaria. Lasso masterfully composed motets, madrigals, and masses, using and combining the different aesthetic universes of his time, even incorporating rhetorical elements typical of the madrigal in his motets. I would like to show you this motet, where it says Anima mea, and you have the translation for 4 voices. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. So this is clearly a motet with Latin text. But the curious thing about it is that Lasso incorporates rhetorical elements that would be easier to find in a madrigal, in the madrigalistic context. This is the first phrase that we didn't explore. What it says is the first phrase. And we have several thematic elements, which are imitated, of course. The first one is quare, very obvious, right? And very simple by itself. And the second one, tristisses. There you can see the whole imitations. And we have this very interesting descending scale in the soprano, which is probably justified by the fact that he is emphasizing the word quare, the word why. And he does it by a leap, an ascending leap of 6, which is extremely rare within the Renaissance context. Concerning harmony, it is very weird to find this kind of relations which are built upon thirds. It would be much more common to find relations built on fifths. This first phrase sounds like this. So as you can see, the first so to speak, tonal establishment, tonal statement appears very late in the phrase. The first chords are very modal in a sense, very hard to identify the center, the key note, the note that upon which the rest of the notes are finding their function. And of course, the voice leading is as well noteworthy. There you can see a very weird relation between the alto and the soprano. If I play directly the 4th bar, it sounds like this. Instead of leading the E to the F, it leads the E to a C and the C to an F. And it creates what we nowadays call a false chromatic relation. And of course, regarding rhetorical aspects, the fact that he insists in such a way in the word why in the bass, it is very obvious, but it doesn't belong to a motet. This is clearly madrigal composition style. And the second phrase, well, it is actually the third phrase, but this one is perhaps more interesting for the topic we are discussing right now. Et quare conturbas me? Why do you disturb me? In this phrase, he makes use of a very flourished and intervallically interesting theme. This is a theme built upon leaps of 6ths and of 5ths. Then there you can see the 2 elements of this theme. And then later, of course, a development of the theme in the soprano, which is not strictly thematic, but it finds its origin in the theme, of course. And there are all the leaps, which are actually very difficult to sing. I will play it for you. In 1594, just a few weeks before his death, Lasso completed his last collection of pieces, Lacrime di San Pietro, for 7 voices consisting of 20 spiritual madrigals with a sacred theme and the final moments. The work is based on the poems of Peter's Denials of Christ by the Italian author Luigi Concilio, a contemporary of Lasso. It is a work in which the harmonic and melodic elements typical of the seconda pratica coexist with an unconceivable contrapuntal complexity. It is also relevant due to the combination of sacred and secular elements that it contains. It presents a religious theme expressed through rhetorical resources typical of the madrigal. I would like to show you a couple of examples. For example, in this phrase, this belongs to the 5th madrigal, and he's talking about the scene, and the other one, sorry. He writes a leap of 7th, which is of major 7th actually in the bass line 2 times, as you can see, in order to emphasize the word faro in Italian, which means scene. I will play the page from the beginning. By itself, it sounds harsher. With the rest of the voices, it is very fine for the ear. And also noteworthy is this G minor with a very clear E flat, and suddenly A minor with E natural. This is also very strong, very raw harmonic contrast. Finally, I would like to show the final motive. As I said before, this very huge piece consists of 20 madrigals, 20 spiritual madrigals, which is in itself quite rare, and one final motive, which, as the motive we saw before, is treated like a madrigal. In this case, it is speaking about the outer, the physical pain that Christ endured in relation with the inner pain that he endured, as seeing a very ungrateful humanity. And the harmonic progressions in this phrase is the harmonic progressions are very interesting, as you will see. I will play from the beginning of the page. There is a very strong false chromatic relation between the 2 sopranos. I played, by the way, a 5th lower, but nowadays it is always sung a 5th lower. As you can see, the C natural somehow resolves in the C sharp in other voice. And I would like to listen to this 3 minutes and then say the very quick conclusions. So this is the sixth of these madrigals. And I would like you to think about what could have been done with polyphony once this has been written. How could polyphony have been developed further? This is the question I would like to have in mind when listening to this. So as you can see, complexity here is a thing, it's definitely a thing. I would just like to make a note about this word, fabelar, which means to speak. As a good madrigal composer, he chooses to, under this word, make the voices to just speak. Like they all start presenting the theme in a very chaotic way, like everybody speaking, even if the text has nothing to do with that. But that's the thing with the madrigal, it's very, very precise and it refers to the literal meaning of isolated words. Very quickly, I say some conclusions. Shut up. So in the same way that the first Renaissance composers proposed a simplified language with respect to that used by the authors of the Ars Subtilia and the Ars Nova, opera authors sought at the beginning of the 17th century a fertile musical universe on which to build a new aesthetic paradigm. Late 16th century polyphony reached such a degree of complexity and richness that it became impossible for composers to continue developing and working on it. It made room for new languages while becoming part of the canon of classical and academic music. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would invite our audience on the internet. Maybe someone has something to ask or comment.
Yes, can I have a question?
Please.
Please.
Yes, you can hear me well. Okay. Of course, everything you told about the late madrigal school of the Italian composers is, of course, correct, and the examples were very brilliant and very well illustrating the development of the madrigal in the end of the 16th century. But I think that maybe it will be also worthy to consider some other aspects of musical rhetoric in the Renaissance, and I notated three, which might be also be a good point to make the picture of the rhetoric in these pieces more complete. The first is the question of musical mode, because as far as we know, the late modal theory, especially those created by Glareanus, also advocated the use of very rhetorical and unusual modal aspects of compositions, for instance, like mixtio tonorum or commixtio tonorum. So maybe it might be also useful to interpret some rhetorical aspects of late Italian madrigals, also in the context of very well-known theory by Gafurius, later taken, of course, by Zarlino. The second aspect, I think, it's the matter of recitation, because in fact it was also a very crucial point of the musical rhetoric in the Renaissance, and it started to be developed still in the early Renaissance. If we, for instance, consider one of the part of the famous Gafurius trilogy, I'm thinking especially about the Harmonica Musicorum Instrumentorum from 1518. He is in this time describing the style of making the music to recite. So the idea of musical recitation is far earlier than the late madrigal, and for instance we can find it also in Germany in Horatian odes by Petrus Tritonius, for example. So it also might be a quite good thing to consider. And the last is the category of musica verbali. We find this discussion about the setting music to the words, or otherwise words to the music, starting from Lanfranco. Later we have Zarlino, we have Stokerius, and the question is maybe the idea of combining words to the music can be seen in a little bit broader connection, a grammatical connection, and not only just in the case of figures, as we know, for instance, from the typology by Burmeister. So maybe it might be useful to see the Renaissance rhetoric in a little bit broader sense, not just the figures and harmony. What do you think?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Of course, the thing is, I chose this very specific topic to show it and to study it. But of course, it is a very broad theme which can be approached from several points of view. So of course, I agree with you. Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would have a quiet question about this practice. First of all, thank you for the presentation. What is actually, in my opinion, should be corrected in the setting of your talk is that you, at the beginning of the talk, you emphasized that madrigal is a secular genre. Mm-hmm. And I was like this, no, there are sacred madrigals, but then you brought it later on. Mm-hmm. So actually, you should have told that at the beginning, because the point of madrigal is not in being of a sacred or secular content, but in presenting the content. And this is exactly the fact that allows the composer to step away from the usual procedure, from progression, to make such leaps and ellipses like you showed between two chords, like something is missing in between, because he just jumps from the middle to the end of the sentence without explaining how it happened, without a usual cadence or progression someone expects, or maybe going in the retrograde progression, like not in the functional way we expect, although this is not functional harmony, but not as we expected, but as turning back in narrative, turning back to reminiscences from previous times. So actually this, in my opinion, this separation into secular and sacred in regard to madrigals is artificial, is post-producted. I don't think that it was really a genre difference in the 16th and early 17th centuries. But this was not my question, it's just my methodological observation about that, because you, at the end, you, of course, everything laid out very correctly. What I'm interested in is, are there some outstanding composers and works that belong to this genre? And from your country, from Catalonia and Spain, we may not be aware of, and maybe you could inform us about the compositional practice here.
Yes.
Apart from Tomás Luis Vittoria, everybody knows about, but maybe we from other countries don't know for much more than that.
So in the case of madrigal, and in particular sacred madrigal, I would mention Francisco Ferrer.
How do you spell it?
F-R-A-N-C-I-S-C-O.
Francisco, I know Francisco.
Yes,
the other part.
Oh, sorry. G-U-E-R.
Guaro, like Guaro.
R-R-E-R-O.
Okay, Guaro.
No.
Yeah?
G-U.
G-U, okay.
R-R-E-R-O.
Okay, good. Yes.
Also a noted composer. Mm-hmm. He has some masses as well. Alonso Lobo, I would say. Mm-hmm. Though the pieces I know from Lobo are more sacred than secular. Mm-hmm. And
because this is very interesting here in this geographic area, we have a long tradition of secular poetry, which actually was also performed with music and later set in madrigals. So this is what I wanted to see.
I don't really know that.
You don't know much about that?
No, about Spanish poetry being put to music. I know not even one example.
Okay.
By Guerreros, there are some examples.
Mm-hmm.
I know what.
Mm-hmm. And can you maybe compare it to the Italian practices? Was it more or less the same? Because, for example, in Croatia, at the time we had Italian practices, like imported music from Italy, and our local general priests went to Italy to study music and went back and brought the same practices. So I just wanted to ask if there was something special, or it was more like Italian style. Also in Germany, even in Protestant countries, it was more or less Italian music. Heilig Schütz.
It was mainly Italian, absolutely. Yeah. The later development of the madrigal did not take place here like it did in Italy. But the early, when I say early, I say 1560s madrigal was yes, very similar to extension of it, or at least the ones I know.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other questions?
No.
Okay, if this is not the case, thanks once again. Our session is over. Unfortunately, 2 speakers have abandoned us today, so everybody is invited to follow the other sessions that interest them. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much.